Hi my friends, my name is Francis. I use they them pronouns and I'm glad you found my channel. It's been 3 months since I posted and I've been like, how do I get back in there? I have opted to tell a story that is not funny, but I'm going to pretend that it's funny, and I'm hoping that I tell the story in a way that you laugh. You're allowed to laugh. It's also a cautionary tale. This was over half a year ago. This was like 9 months ago, so you don't gotta worry. It's fine. Everything's resolved. I'm okay. I'm here. Everything's alright. I'm going to tell you the story of the first date I ever went on with a girl. It went so well. Every time that I go away for a while, I forget how to record videos, and my hair looks disgusting. What the heck? Can I just poof it out, make it look really bad? It's actually kind of a look. Alright, that's my hair now. I matched with this girl on Bumble back when I first got back from camp. We were just talking and everything was normal. And that wasn't normal. There were some red flags, but I was like, I'm just gonna ignore that because I don't trust my intuition and I'm stupid. And so we sort of were talking, got her on Snapchat. She asked me, oh, you want to go on a date this weekend? Yeah, sure, I'll go on a date. So she was like, where do you want to go? I never want a person I don't know to know where I live if I have the choice. Especially with like dates. I want to get to know someone before I give them information about my life. And this cautionary tale will explain why. I was like, oh, there's this town up north, and I really like it there. It was like my hometown's big sister, so I knew the area. My cautionary tale, I'm going to give you pointers along the way. Pointer 1, don't let them know where you live. Pointer 2, go on a date in an open area. Pointer 3, if you can, make sure you know the area. Like, really well. Know the area as well as you can. I was like, yeah, we can go to this town. I always wanted to go on a date in that town in a very specific area. I wish it wasn't with her that I went on the date. Maybe someday I'll fix that. She was like, oh yeah, that's like half an hour from my house. It was also half an hour from my house. I was like, yeah, cool, sweet. Meet you there. I drive to this town, and we met in a parking lot because open space where I know. And I parked my car and I was waiting for her. She got lost. She showed up and she was like, oh, hey, so glad to see you. And I'm like, oh, me too. But normal, like, get to know you date stuff. And she was like, oh, so yeah, it's really hot out here. I don't know what your plan is, but we can hop in my car if you want to work out a plan. Pointer 4? Am I on 4 or 5? I don't know. Don't get in their car. That's an important one for this story. She's like, oh, you can get in my car. And I was like, no. And she's like, oh, okay. Well, yada, yada, yada. Where do you want to go? I was like, oh, well, there's a cool little nature trail. We can walk over there. Because I knew the nature trail. I knew the area. As much safety as I could put in. And she was like, oh, yeah, sweet. We can go there. Well, we can drive to where it is. You can get in my car. And I was like, no. I'm not getting in your car. And she was like, okay. So we start walking. We sit by a pavilion. And we're just like talking about life. Trying to get to know each other because I was getting kind of weird vibes. Especially because she had already brought up me getting in her car twice after I was pretty clear in text and in person that I didn't want to get in her car. So I was kind of weirded out. And I'm like, well, I don't want to go down the nature trail with you right now. So I brought her to a pavilion that I knew of. And we were just like talking about life, And she was not nice. She was not a nice person. She seemed annoyed. She told me that she worked somewhere that I frequently went to and was like 99% sure she did not work there. And when I tried to sort of be like, oh, I love that place. I've never seen you around. She kind of got weird about it. It's really hot in here because life is a nightmare. So I'm sorry if you can hear my fan. I know you can hear my fan, and I'm sorry. She was just like weird. It was weird. We saw some trans people and I was like, oh my god, more trans people. And she was like, oh, what are you, a chaser? And I was like, huh? I'm trans. I can't be a chaser. But I was like, no, oh my god, it's just people that, oh, that was another thing. Around that time is when I started to realize that she did not see me as a trans individual. She was using she, her pronouns with me. She was calling me a girl, and I was kind of like, I don't like that, but it's fine, I guess, because I'm on a date and I don't know how to get out of the situation. Pointer number 5. Don't be afraid to leave a situation. You can leave a date early. Pointer 6. What's pointer 6? Pointer 6. Trust your intuition. For the love of God, if your gut is telling you bad, leave. So, she calls me a chaser, and I'm like offended. I'm quite offended at that point, because that's sort of like a big, oh, so you don't really respect me. A lot of people don't understand why that bothered me as much, and maybe you don't understand either. It bothered me a lot, and I kind of made that known to her, and she didn't really care. But anyway, so we didn't say hi to the trans people, even though they seemed pretty cool. Then she was like, oh, this is kind of boring. And I was like, yeah, no, that's fair. And she's like, well, if you want, we can go back to my car. And I'm like, I'm not going to your car. And she was like, okay, well, do you want to go somewhere else? I was like, we can go to the mall, which was like in between the town I brought her to and my house. The mall was like in between there. So I was like, yeah, we can go to the mall. That sounds great. Go to Hot Topic, Barnes & Noble. I knew the mall well, so I was like, it's fine. So she's like, yeah, sweet, we can carpool. Hop in my car. And I was like, I'm not hopping in your car. And she was like, but, my car has so much better gas mileage, which it did, but I was like, I'm not comfortable with that. And at this point, I was not as aggressively advocating for myself, which I should have been. So I didn't like straight up yell at her or anything, but I was like, I'm not getting in your car. And she's like, oh, gas mileage. I'm like, no, I'm not getting in your car. And she's like, well, it's going to be easier if yada, yada, yada. And I was like, I'm not getting in your car. We can go to the mall. I'm not getting in your car to go there. And she seemed like really annoyed. She's like, fine, whatever. We won't get in my car then. She's like, but I'm following you to the mall. And I was like, okay. And I'm like, I don't really take highways. And she's like, fine, then I won't take highways. And she followed my car all the way to the mall, which was like, it made sense, but it also kind of made me feel trapped. Like I couldn't leave because she was following me. And like I took a few wrong turns and she took the wrong turns with me, which, I mean, it makes sense. It's normal. But with all the other red flags, it was kind of like, I felt kind of trapped. I felt weird that she kept trying to get me in her car. So we get to the mall. She seems annoyed. After telling me that she had all day to hang out, she seems annoyed that we're still hanging out. Even though, from her perspective, she seemed to think we were getting along. From my perspective, that was just uncomfortable. But so we get to the mall, and she parks next to me, and she's like, all right, hop in my car, and we can yada yada. I'm like, why would I get in your car? We're literally at the mall. And she's like, I don't know. My car's got AC. Your car doesn't have AC. And I'm like, my car does have AC. I just don't use it. And she was like, okay, whatever. Let's go to the mall. She seemed really annoyed. Like super duper duper unbelievably annoyed. She keeps texting somebody. I'm feeling really uncomfortable. I don't know why she's so upset. Don't know why she wants me in her car so bad. So we hang out in the mall, and she's just increasingly getting rude. Like, she's just rude to me every chance she gets. She tries to get me to buy her stuff, and I'm like, I'm really poor. And she's like, oh yeah, wow, great date. And I'm like, I can barely afford myself. Like, I'm sorry. I know that that's like customary, that the girl gets her stuff paid for or whatever, but like, no, like, I'm poor. I can barely afford this date. I don't know, it was annoying. I ended up buying her a bouncy ball because she just wouldn't drop it, and she was like annoyed that I bought her a bouncy ball, and I'm like, I don't know what you want from me. She kept saying like weird things that just made me feel stupid and invalidated. Like, I can't even remember it anymore. I shut so much of this date out of my brain. But then we kind of got bored at the mall, and she was like, oh, I'm not really ready to go home for the night yet. I'm like, okay. And I'm like, do you have any ideas? And she's like, we're in the mall, leaving at this point, going to the cars. And she was like, oh, we can figure it out in my car. And I'm like, we can figure it out in the mall. like, where do you want to go? And she's like, well, if we go to my car. And I'm like, there's AC in the mall. There's chairs in the mall. Let's talk about this plan in the mall, out in the open. She seems so annoyed at this point. And she's like, fine, well, I know this is a 24-hour coffee shop. We can go there. And I'm like, okay, we'll go to the 24-hour coffee shop. That sounds pretty cool, I guess. And she's like, yeah, sure, whatever. Like, just does not want to hang out with me, even though she's the one continuing the date. And we walk out to the cars, and she's like, hey, get in my car. I can help you with the GPS. I'm like, I literally typed it into the GPS, and it's right here. I don't need to get in your car. And she's like, well, if you hop in my car. I'm like, I'm not going to get in your car. And she's like, well, I can drive you to the coffee shop. I'm like, I don't need... Oh, the coffee shop, just for reference, it's like this town, the mall, my house. The coffee shop's like right there, like really close to my house. And so yeah, she's like, well, get in my car and we can carpool to the coffee shop. And I'm like, well, it's on my way home anyway. She's like, well, me too. And I'm like, okay, well, then my car is going to be in the small parking lot and I don't want that. And she's like, well, we can carpool and I'll drive you back here to your car. And I'm like, I don't want to get in your car. Like, I want to drive my own car. I'm not getting in your car. And she was like, well, if you get in my car. And I'm like, for the love of God, I'm not getting in your car. Sorry, I said I was going to tell this story funny, but I'm getting frustrated again because, like, what the heck. Anyway, so she is like super annoyed, like unbelievably annoyed. And she's like, fine, well, I'm following your car again. I'm like, okay, cool. So then we go around and we have like trouble parking or whatever, and then we find a spot, and she's already bought her coffee by the time that I found my spot. Like, she found her spot right away. I had to like circle around a few times because Grand Rapids is busy. Yeah, she already bought her drink, and she's already like drank down a lot of it. And I go in and I'm like, oh, hi. And she's like, uh-huh, yeah, sure. Seems so annoyed, like just unbelievably annoyed, so unhappy. She keeps texting on her phone. I'm a little anxious. I'm like, what if someone else shows up, you know? It's just like, at this point, I'm getting the vibes. At this point, I've had the vibes for a while that she might be trying to take me. Which is the not fun part of the story, right? Like, nobody's gonna try to get you in their car that often. I forgot an important piece. Something that she said with her own mouth as we were leaving the mall because I would not get in her car. This was after she tried to get me in her car to figure out where we're going. After she then immediately tried to get me in her car to figure out the GPS. And after she immediately tried to get me in her car to carpool. And I said no all 3 times, very adamantly. She said to me, without really any sarcasm or joking tone, you're really hard to kidnap. And I was like, huh? And she was like, nothing, it doesn't matter. I'm like, okay. And then she followed me all the way to the coffee shop, so again, I felt like I couldn't really deviate from the plan or anything. Didn't want her to know that I'd figured it out because that just felt like the situation would get more dangerous. So at this point, I'm circling through my head how I'm getting out of here, which is, it's terrifying. This whole date just became progressively more terrifying every time she asked me to get in her car and got more angry at me and started telling me like how strong she was, and like in a weird way, not like a normal way of like, oh, you know, I lift weights, or I don't know. It was like weird the way she was sort of boasting about how strong she was and how fast she was. Like, it almost felt like a threat. And so I was just trying to like play along, be cool about it. So we get to the coffee shop. She's so annoyed. She doesn't want to talk to me. We are sitting out there. We met some really cool people. There's people in and out of the coffee shop who were super cool. There was one guy who looked and sounded like Mr. Rogers, except he was misogynistic and awful. But he was fascinating. Like, he was utterly fascinating to listen to him talk. Like, I don't know, and I had a really bad day, so I was like, I can look past your terrible misogyny and just talk to you because I need to talk to Mr. Rogers right now. This woman's trying to kidnap me. And so I'm just sitting there, and she's annoyed that I'm not talking to her, but she's also not talking to me, and she's texting away on her phone, and she just seems annoyed, like it felt like she was trying to figure something out. And yeah, no, it was some sketchy stuff. And Mr. Rogers was helpful. He made me feel less in danger. And Mr. Rogers was talking to this one lady who was like in charge of a soup kitchen. It's like super cool person. And then there was this other person, they were non-binary, and I was like, oh my god, me too. And so we were like camaraderie about the non-binary thing, and she was super insensitive. Like, she was just being mean. She was being terrible. I did not like how she was talking about non-binariness. And she kind of, like, I felt like she was cornering this person in conversation, where she was like, well, do you think that non-binary is trans? Like, she was acting like that was the stupidest thing in the world, and the person seemed kind of, like, uncomfortable. They're like, well, I don't know, I don't really, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I do. I think it can be. And she was like, oh, yeah, really? I'm like, yeah, like, if a person is non-binary and they feel like they identify as a trans person, then that's their identity. Some non-binary people don't identify as trans, and other non-binary people do identify as trans. She wasn't very happy that I was, like, kind of coming at her now. She wasn't happy at all. She seemed angry. I kind of was concerned because I felt like I'd opened my mouth when I shouldn't have. It was a bad situation. It was an uncomfortable time for me. She was just being awful continuously. And then I was like, I think I found a way out of this situation. And I just started acting so tired. So unbelievably tired. Like I was gonna pass out on the spot. And she was like, oh, you seem really tired. I'm like, yeah, I think I'm gonna have to call it a night soon. And she's like, oh man, already? It was like midnight, 1 a.m. That's why we went to the 24-hour place. We had been hanging out for like 9 hours. The entire time I felt super uncomfortable and like I couldn't escape. And I was like, yeah, I'm really tired. And she's like, oh, well, we can go back to my house and hang out and watch a movie or something. And I'm like, no, I think I'm just really tired. And she was like, well, you know, yada yada, trying to get me to go to her house now. She's like, well, I can give you my address and and I'm like, no, I'm not really comfortable with that. I just need to go to bed. And she's like, well, I think she tried to get me to go in her car again. And I was like, no, I just need to go home. I just kept like, I need to go home. I need to go home. And she just kept trying to get me in her car, get me to her house, just getting increasingly annoyed, like the night was wasted. And she's like, well, at least let me drive you home, because you seem really tired and I don't want you to fall asleep at the wheel. I'm able to handle it. I'm not going to fall asleep at the wheel. And she was like, well, I'm not so convinced. I'm a little concerned. I don't want you to pass out. Like, you can get in my car. And, yeah, she said that so many times. She's like, you can get in my car and I'll just drive you home. And then in the morning, I'll drive you back or something like that. I don't know. She had some whole convoluted plan to get me in her car. And I was like, no, really, I'm fine. And she's like, well, I mean, I don't want you to drive all the way back to the town we were from. Like, that's a really far away. It's like a half an hour from here. And I was like, I'm like 10 minutes from my house. Like, it's not a big deal. And she seemed really annoyed. And she was like, we're only 10 minutes from your house. Like, we're only 10 minutes from my house. Why didn't we go here to begin with? And I was like, I really like that town. And she was like, we could have just hung out at my house to begin with. We could have just hung out at your house to begin with. And was like getting annoyed. She was like, oh, you're only 10 minutes away from here? Like, where do you live? What street do you live on? What does your house look like? And I'm like, oh, I just live about 10 miles, or I just live 10 minutes. And she's like, do you live towards this place? Do you live towards this place? And I'm like, how in the world do I navigate away from telling her where I live? And I was like, oh, I don't know how to give directions. I don't know street names. I knew my street name. It was my address. And she was like, you don't know street names? And I'm like, no. And she's like, do you know where it's by? And I'm like, I just moved here. I'm new here. I'd been there 6 months. But I was just trying to, and I think at that point she finally was like, fine, whatever, like, just go home. And I was like, okay, cool. And I got in my car and I drove to the store because I was not having her follow me anymore. Made sure I left before she did. I knew where her car was. I was like watching her. I did not want her to know where I lived. I took so many weird turns. Like, tip 7, make it so convoluted and hard. Like, if you get bad vibes from them, just go out of your way. Go so hard. If you don't want someone to follow you home, take so many turns. Don't let up till they stop following you. Side story. One time I was leaving Meyer to go to my house, and I noticed that this truck was following me. Like, following me. And when I turned into my down my street, which there was not many people down my street, not many people took that turn. So I took that turn, and the truck took that turn also. I drove right past my house, and I took another turn. The truck took that turn, and I took another turn, and I was out on the main road again. I took a whole triangle, and the truck followed me, and I did the triangle again. I did the triangle like 2.5 times before they caught on that they were following me. And then I drove back to the store, and they stopped following me. And then I went home. So yeah, step 7, be convoluted. Who cares? Who cares their opinion? Just make it so hard for them. Make creepy people's jobs so hard for them. Every chance you get. Make their life hard. Don't give anything to them. So yeah, I went to the store. She didn't follow me. I waited at the store. I hung out at the store for a while. I drove home making sure no one was following me. And then I went home, and I was home, and I was like, oh my god. And my roommate was like, how did your date go? And I was like, ah. And I did not tell them that I felt like I was going to get kidnapped because I could not say anything. Like, I got home from that date and I pretended that it was a normal date because I could not handle what had just happened. It was not a fun time. It was really concerning. So then there's like an after, like that's the conclusion of my story, and then there's like an afterword to the story. Because somebody sent me something not much longer later that said that there was a human trafficking ring in my area, around my house, around where she lived, miraculously. That the police had caught them. I hadn't blocked her on Snapchat yet, and miraculously, when the human trafficking ring got found, she stopped watching my story. Do I have proof that she was trying to kidnap me? No. Do I think that I was almost kidnapped by this woman? Yeah. Tip number 8. Girls are not free of being evil. Girls can kidnap you. Trans people can kidnap you. Gay people can kidnap you. You're not safe, even though you feel safe. That's the really awful part, because I feel like for people who are afraid of getting kidnapped, you go on a date with a guy and you're like, yeah, I'm going to take these precautions because I know the society I live in. But I feel like, at least I fell into this, you go on a date with a girl and you're like, oh, it's not so bad, it's a girl. She wouldn't kidnap me. She knows the scariness of it. The world is not so kind. Women are part of human trafficking, and they are the perpetrators as well. It's a terrible world we live in. This is my cautionary tale. Be safe. Follow my pointers, and think of pointers of your own. And this is like regardless of gender, because people kidnap all sorts of people. It's not... No one is safe, and it's horrifying. Didn't mean to make this doom and gloom. Didn't mean to make this all doom and gloom. I didn't know how to jump back into this. The story has been circling in my mind every single time that I go on a date with literally anyone. Every time that I go on a date, every time I meet someone new, every single time now, I think about this woman, just all of the stuff, because you have to do that. That's the horrifying thing about it, is you have to be cautious because you never know. I'm so sorry that this ended so sad after I said that I was going to try to make it happy and fun. But it's not a happy, fun story. But sometimes we just tell stories and ways to help us cope. Be safe on your dates. Be safe meeting new people. Be safe, my buddies. Be safe, my buddies. Trust no one. You can trust people. Just make sure you know them. Okay, I hope you guys have been well. I've missed you. Hoping to get a job where I don't hate my life, and then I'll start uploading more. Because I miss you guys. I care about you guys. Hope you're well.